Now we're going to talk about developing data science teams. I think this is a really critical section. And the reason for that is there's a lot of companies who want to get into big data. They're reading a lot of hype around big data, a lot of news, and a lot of research around big data, but they don't really know how to begin. How do they think about this organizationally? How do they think about the people who put on the teams? So this is, I think, really critical. And we'll talk about some of the roles needed for a data science team, and also differentiate between the organizational models for data science teams. And the last thing we're going to do is talk about the role of executive engagement for enhancing organizations' analytical maturity. We touched on that kind of pyramid view at the end of the first module of the course. So think about it in that context. I mean, it's really critical to get executive sponsorship and engagement. So here we'll talk about a framework for developing data science teams. If you think about this kind of bottom up, for the team we have these 7 roles. And then for developing data science capabilities, we say developing because not everybody is going to want to build a data science team from scratch. You may take an existing team and transform it and change it and add to it, or you may want to create one from scratch, or you may want to outsource it or do kind of an as-a-service model or crowdsource it. We'll talk about organizational models. This can be a centralized data scientist team or a data science team. Decentralized can be a hybrid of these. And, executive engagement can vary also. There's talk of creating new dedicated roles for chief data officer and chief analytics officers. But in some ways, having a very data-driven CEO as a CEO brings with it a lot of strengths that may be preferable. Depends on the situation. So if we think about which is a BI analyst and which is a data scientist, if we look at John on the left, he's mostly doing sales reports for the last quarter. He's performing customer feedback surveys and looking at average cost per suppliers. And if we look at Janet on the right, she's predicting regional sales for the next quarter, right? Instead of past, she's future, and discovering customer opinions through social media analysis and social network analysis, and looking at ways to maximize sales campaign ROI. So obviously the activities they're doing are pretty different, and I'm sure most of you can guess which is intended to be which, right? So person on the left has more roles of a traditional BI analyst, and the one on the right, of course, is more of a data scientist type of role. I would say a lot of the people who've emerged to do this fall into 4 main categories. One, they can be recent science, technology, engineering, or math graduates, and they tend to have some quantitative skills and some technical ability, and maybe they actually have a lot of these, but they don't really have enough experience to be really strong at both of these things yet, which can take time. Then you have BI professionals and IT and DBAs, and they can be very technical people, but maybe a little more limited in terms of their understanding of quantitative methods and skills in that area. And then the other area is you have kind of the opposite. You have people who maybe they're quantitative analysts or business analysts, and they may actually have a good deal of exposure to quantitative methods, but maybe they have less experience with technology. And I would say they're probably better at running the models, but they may be a little bit more restrictive in the kinds of data that they can work with. And of course, data scientists tend to be strong at both of these. They're very quantitative and they're very comfortable with technology, so they can reshape data and they can do a lot of things with it. So if we looked at the profile of a data scientist and what makes a data scientist, one, they tend to be very quantitative people, right? They're not afraid of doing math, they're not afraid of doing algorithms, and they're comfortable to them, or they may even gravitate toward doing them, right? And second, as I mentioned, they tend to be pretty technical people. And when you put this with being quantitative, it lets them write algorithms, it lets them parse and reshape data, and lets them have some license to be creative with how do you come up with solutions to very complex technical or more behavioral characteristics. They tend to be skeptical people, and I don't mean like negative people. I mean more in terms of they're critical thinkers. They're able to, challenge solutions that either they create to see if they're viable or that their peers create. They're gonna want to invite constructive criticism on solutions that get created. They tend to be very communicative and collaborative. Um, I think they realize they can't do all 7 of those roles themselves. It's very rare for someone to be able to do all those things or enjoy doing all those things. That's a lot of different people. So they tend to need to have to partner and collaborate with people. I say communicative here with a caveat, which is they may not be fantastic orators, right? They may be good with verbal skills and verbal communication, but by this I just mean they need to be able to communicate their work. So that can be verbally, it can be in writing, it can be through data visualizations. There's a lot of different ways that they can do that. But I mean, that's really what enables them to drive change. If they can't communicate what they've done, it makes it very hard to have an impact. And the last thing is they tend to be curious and pretty creative people. So they have a sense of wonder. They're interested in what new data sets, what insights are hidden there, what they can find, what kind of experiments they can do. If there's a new way they can take to re-engineering an old problem or changing an existing process, I think that's the kind of mindset they bring to it. So they have an entrepreneurial mindset. They're willing to experiment and try new things, and they have a lot of the hard skills that will enable them to see it through. So this was an article from Harvard Business Review talking about data scientists as the sexiest job of the 21st century by DJ Battil and Tom Davenport. This is actually, the title threw me, I have to confess, but it was actually a good article, and it talks a lot about how do you find and hire people of that profile? Where do you look for them? How do you retain them? How do you keep them happy? And what should you look for to bring them on board? How do you build these teams? So I mentioned this because first, I think it's a good article, but second, because I think if big data and data science has made it to HBR, it's gone somewhat mainstream in terms of the awareness, the consciousness around big data. So this is becoming really, really huge. So, a lot of people I know are trying to hire data scientists, and I thought we could just make one quick example as to resumes. How do you look at the resume of a data scientist? What jumps out at you as patterns? So one, they tend to have background in things like statistics or applied math. Here we see some evidence of that and what kind of tools they use, what kinds of methods they're used to using. Here they've used R and S+, and SAS and MATLAB. I mean, these are very common analytical tools that we've talked about. They have experience with things like data mining, and we talked about some examples they've got. They've been research scientists. They've done a lot of data mining projects. They've done some programming. Again, if we go back to that quantitative and technical mix, they've done some things to illustrate that. They have some experience with Python and other programming languages. I think Python's a very, very popular one in this domain. And they do have advanced STEM degrees here in master's or PhD in math or statistics, and they show some of that. So not every time, but I would say a lot of the time, this is probably the case. As we said, there's a breadth of roles here. So there's really 7 roles you need for this data science team, or 7 kinds of functions of the kinds of roles that need to be played here for this to be done well. So it's not just about the data scientist, right? It's about we were talking recently and he said, this is truly a team sport. This is not a data scientist on a pedestal. It's about people kind of working, each kind of doing their part to get this done well.